Hey guys, it's King. Welcome to another Autism Digest interview, where today we have a writer of a story called Simple Simon, which is a story about a 16-year-old autistic savant who is protected by the FBI after he cracks a government code. That book later became the movie Mercury Rising, starring Bruce Willis and Alec Baldwin as those FBI agents. He also has a YouTube channel focused on cooking with over 200K subscribers called Cooking with Rye. His name is Ryne Pearson. Thanks for coming on, Ryne.
It's actually Ryan. My parents just got creative with the spelling. I just say Ryan.
I can tell. For those that don't know the name Ryne Douglas Pearson, do you mind telling us your story in your own words?
Yeah, I got started writing when I was very young in school, but it was never the sort of thing that you could do as a career. It was just, it's just not something at that point. And it was just later, I think it was in my early 20s, and I had an idea for a book, which I just decided to write. And I was fortunate enough to get that first novel published. It was called Cloudburst, and that introduced the character that ended up being in Simple Simon, the FBI agent, Art Jefferson. In the movie, his name was Art Jeffries, but in the books, his name is Art Jefferson. And that just kind of started my career as a writer. I've written novels for over 30 years now. I worked in screenwriting for probably 20 years, writing movies. And now kind of semi-retired and doing a cooking YouTube channel.
Had some eight. And I started writing personally when I was 14 years old for a sports blog. I'm about to be 21 in July. So today's generation of writers is honestly amazing. It's beautiful you can make that a career hub, which leads me to my next question. Where did the idea for Simple Simon come from?
Well, I had a friend who was in the Navy and worked in kind of an adjacent area to cryptography. And we were just chatting one day, we weren't even like researching anything. And he just had mentioned that he had heard stories that cryptographers would sometimes slip bits of code that they were working on into publicly available, I'll just put it, publicly available writings. In the story, I used a magazine, a puzzle magazine. And he said they would slip it in there to see if anyone could crack it. And just, kind of general sort of thing. And I thought, that's a really cool idea. You slip it in there, no one cracks it, but then what if someone someday can? And I was thinking, because years before I had watched a documentary about savants, autistic savants, and that one was mostly related to music and things like that. But I thought, really, what if there was someone with autism who had this just hidden, brilliant talent that no one knew about because they were locked in their own world. They weren't very verbal, but they look at this and they see what no one can see. It would take supercomputers, years to try and even potentially crack this. And this young kid, who in the book was a teenager and in the movie was younger, can just look at it and see it, and it fits together in his brain like a puzzle, and he just sees the answer to it. And I think there's actually a scene in the book, and I can't remember if they did it in the movie. I don't think they did, where he does puzzles, but he does them upside down because he sees patterns rather than pictures. And I thought that's a really interesting sort of way to approach this story. And so that's really where the idea for Simple Simon came from.
That's definitely impressive. And I know there's definitely a lot of savants, most likely in that field, a lot in the field of cryptography,
yes,
who honestly inspire me. A lot of what we've talked to on here. Me personally, I'm on the spectrum myself, and my way of thinking is very similar to the character in the book. My next question for you is, what did you think of how they handled autism when filming the movie, the character specifically? If you could go back and time, if you were running the movie, would you add an actual autistic actor to play the main character, like say Dan Aykroyd or someone like that?
I think that, well, I know that during the production and the pre-production of the movie, they did a lot of work. And in fact, one of the things they did is they had conversations with people in the autism community, which, when you think about it, back then was not as well understood even today, 30 years later. 30 years ago, people knew what autism was, they knew aspects of it, but they didn't know the full breadth and scope of it. It wasn't something that was as widely understood and accepted as it is today. But they actually brought in consultants, and they talked to families that have young children who are autistic. And the actor Miko Hughes, who played Simon in the movie, spent time with people who are autistic to just try and understand a little bit. And one of the reasons the movie was not called Simple Simon was because they had some feedback from people in the autistic community that they thought that made it seem like he was just simple. He wasn't, smart, brilliant, whatever you want to call it, and that it kind of belittled it. I never looked at it that way in terms of the book title, because it was more a play on that, the idea of Simple Simon breaking a mold. You're not simple, so what do people call you? Simple. But that's one of the reasons they changed the title of the movie, from what I was told. So I think they did a fairly good job of trying to get an understanding of the characters, not just from the book, but from the actual perspective of people who are autistic and interact with people who are autistic. And like I said, back then it was much different than even today. And this was, I wrote the book a little over 30 years ago. And the movie came out, I think, 30 years ago. Well, no, what is it? I think it was 1998 the movie came out. And the book came out in 1995.
I do applaud Hollywood's efforts to research autism when making a lot of these projects. But one big thing, and you'd probably agree with me, that Hollywood has to work on is casting actual autistic actors, like Kayla Cromer in The Good Doctor, which is if you've seen the story of an autistic doctor. She was one of the many autistic actresses cast as some of the ensemble in that series specifically. Or Dan Aykroyd, he's self-diagnosed, and he's played a lot of leads. And research is just as good. My next question for you is, you are a cook, you have a cooking channel with over 200,000 followers, and a lot of autistic individuals have food aversions and sensitivities, many of which I've written about personally for a few publications. As a cook, what's your tip for handling those food textures and sensitivities when cooking for autistic individuals?
I think you just first have to understand who it is you're cooking for. And I don't think it just relates to someone who might have food aversions and food sensitivities who's autistic. My daughter has celiac disease, and she was diagnosed when she was 13. So just the idea of having to cook for someone who has really a life-threatening food sensitivity, and which is a gluten for someone with celiac disease, that can actually, if it's not treated in the most severe cases, can kill you. You have to look at anyone you're cooking for and just create what is something that they're going to enjoy. I don't look at it any other way. I look at the person, if I'm cooking for them, and try and find out what it is they like, they don't like, and create for that. It's all about enjoyment to me. And I don't think that's different for someone with autism. If they have aversions or sensitivities, you need to look at that and say, well, what can I make for that person that they're really going to enjoy? And I've done that many times in my life, not specifically for someone with autism, but for people who have a problem with something they eat. I look at what can't they have, or what don't they want, and what can I make instead of that they would really enjoy. It's really simple to me as someone who cooks.
Yeah, it definitely sounds simple, and it can definitely be simplified if we think of it in that perspective. For me personally, I love meat, love barbecue, love a bunch of weird food like brains of animals and sardines and that kind of thing. Yeah, I despise the Kraft mac and cheese and nuts and stuff like that. So
I can't stand mac and cheese. Mac and cheese is not my thing.
So you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so, it's all about having empathy towards individual situations, no matter what they might have. My
So
next,
I had a family member, not just my daughter, someone who was very close to me, my brother-in-law, who out of the blue ended up with a life-threatening medical condition that completely forced a change in his diet. Absolute, and we had to adapt to it. But the thing about it was, we were able to do that in my family and our extended family because you just look at the things. What can't they have? What can they have? What can we do to make it good that they're going to enjoy, but also everyone else is going to enjoy? Because there's a lot of variables when you're cooking that you can make that are not just specific to one person. It's going to taste good for other people too. It's not like you're this person, I have to make you one thing that only you're going to enjoy and no one else can. You just have to be sensitive to what the things are.
exactly. My next question for you is, in today's day and age, how can Hollywood improve its understanding of neurodiversity beyond the
Mhm.
research and what they're doing now? You've touched on that a little
Yeah.
bit, but
I think if you look back again 30 years, now I started working in actual screenwriting around the year 2000. Um, I wrote a movie called Knowing, which had starred Nicolas Cage, and that came out in 2009. Now, that had nothing to do with neurodiversity or autism or anything like that, but the time frame from then till now, in terms of what people are aware of, has changed dramatically. And people may not think of this, but one of the things that has allowed that is honestly the internet. It really has. You would not be able to research, communicate, uh, reach out to people who might have a perspective on something. Uh, 30 years ago, you really couldn't. That was very difficult. I mean, that was at the beginning of the internet age in the mid 90s, where, basically it was email and some pretty bad websites at that time. And as things have gotten further into the future, people have been able to tell their stories. People have been able to share things like you that become kind of a repository of experiences that someone can look at and say, okay, here's someone on the spectrum. Here's how they function. Here's what they do. Here's how they talk. Here's how they're interested. Just a breadth of information that is now available to anyone, including people in Hollywood. And if you had gone back 30 years ago and looked, like you were saying, for actors who do have autism or on the spectrum or self-diagnosed or professionally diagnosed, you might not find many that are open back then. But now you will find people like that because it is more accepted to just admit it. It's strange to think, but that does take time. And part of it is just the dissemination of information and how easy it is for that information to get to masses now.
exactly. I definitely never thought of it in that aspect. My parents both work in IT and they're around that kind of stuff all the time. They're always telling me that the internet nowadays, especially with some of these AI chatbots and search engines that are out there, it's an amazing thing. You can do anything with it, really. So
Yeah,
there's honestly no excuse to not have proper research done
right,
on X, Y, and Z thing. My next
right.
question for you is, what's your advice for anyone, neurodivergent or not, that wants to get into the writing or screenwriting industries?
Well, when I started, there was really only one path. You had to get an agent. Well, you had to write a book. You had to get an agent, and that agent would try and get you in with a publisher. My very first novel was rejected over 200 times by an agent, by all agents. And I had even reached out directly to publishers at that point to try and get it published, and it was, universally rejected. Then I finally got an agent, and within 2 weeks, he sold it, including to a publisher who had previously rejected it when I sent it in. So back then, that's the way you did it. That route still exists, but I don't recommend it. The way I recommend things now is you just write it and you get it out there yourself. There are so many platforms now to publish your own work. In fact, the books that I've written in the last 15 years, I've published myself through things like Amazon, Draft to Digital, which goes to all other publishers. So you can do these things now yourself. And I always think now how easy it would have been for me back 30 years ago if that had been available, not in terms of becoming famous. I was never famous, but in terms of getting my work out there where people could see it. I could have been out there much earlier. And I was very fortunate that I was able to get the rights back to all my previous novels that had been published by traditional publishers so that then I could publish them now myself through those avenues I mentioned. That's, to me, the best way for someone now doing it is you certainly can go the other route and try and get an agent and a publisher, but you're going to be spending a lot of time when you could actually be writing more things and publishing more things. Screenwriting's a little different because it is changing, but it is a little different because there are still sort of what's accepted to be the major producers of movies, the studios and things like that. There are now a lot of streaming services and such. So sort of the landscape is wider, but getting in is still very difficult. That said, a lot of filmmakers now start themselves and they make their own movies and they get it out there on the internet, on YouTube, on other platforms. And that's kind of the way that a lot of people do it now, because you're going to have less resistance to getting your product out there for people to enjoy. And you're going to be able to control it more. And that's the other thing I really like about this new paradigm of both writing and filmmaking is you get the control closer to the creator. When I wrote Simple Simon, there were edits done to it, but nothing major. I was very happy with the book at the end when it came out. But the film, and I was happy with the film too, but when Hollywood gets a hold of something, they make changes. They have to do things. And it's just an interesting sort of way that it works. And I like the idea that when you can keep control closer to yourself to see that end product the way you want, I think that's a very big plus.
I absolutely agree. Not just with writing or screenwriting, but anything really, like we were saying earlier. But internet is amazing. Creators can get their start on it, and if they work hard enough. My last question for you is, what does the future hold for you? Or do you have anything that you want to promote?
Well, I mean, the future for me is I just enjoy what I do on the cooking channel now. I still do some writing. And it's funny because I can't remember how many years ago it was. Maybe 5 years ago or something like that. It was longer than that the idea sort of percolated. And for me, it was like I always wondered, whatever happened with Simon? Because at the end of the book, he's sort of taken into a safe environment, and because he's lost his parents, and he's sort of given this, I don't want to say idyllic life for what he would have been able to enjoy, but he was safe. And I always thought after that, what happened? And so several years ago, I actually wrote, I don't know if you saw it, I wrote a book called Simon Sees that looks at him again as he's an adult now and what happened. And I thought the same thing I thought during the writing of Simple Simon is the people that wanted something from him were never going to give up. He's still that sort of untested vessel of brilliance, and people would want to try and get to that somehow for their own purposes. So I went and I wrote that, and I mean, it's a very different book from Simple Simon, but it's a much longer book than Simple Simon, because when you try and explore someone's life as they're an adult, and it also came back to a central idea. Simon was in the character of Simple Simon, was a very insular person with autism. He was not really nonverbal, didn't have a lot of ability to communicate. And the way that I approached the story was I looked back to like World War II and the Manhattan Project. And I thought, what if the government had thought, we're going to go with the Manhattan Project of neuroscience to try and unlock his brain and see if we can actually get at that for their own purposes, and what would that mean for him? What would his life be then? Obviously, there would be the good guys and the bad guys, and people who would try and use him and people who try and protect him. And that was a really fun thing to do, to explore that, Simon as an adult, and actually kind of unlocking his mind and seeing what was that possible, because there was a lot of research, and there still is, going on to autism, and you would know this with neuropsychology and things like that, that people would love to be able to do that, but is it really possible? And so I took that road of, okay, someone found the way to do it, and what would that mean for him? So I always found that to be a really interesting and fun exercise when I wrote that book.
It definitely sounds like it was. We'll be sure to check it out. Anyways, that's going to do for this interview. Thank you so much to Ryan for coming on, sharing his perspectives on everything. If you guys want to see more amazing interviews, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Autism Digest channel. Check out her newest issue by going to autismdigest.com, and look out for the audio file on our Spotify by typing in Autism Digest. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.